Travis, we don't have a particularly good wide receiver class this year, but that makes the guys to the top arguably even more powerful, and it makes the search for sleepers more intense. Let's start with my hometown guy here in McMillan. Been excited about him since his first day on campus, one of the biggest recruits that Arizona has ever had. And then when you have that big recruit and he hits a really high-level outcome from there, that is exciting. As we're thinking about him through the years, you get a little bit nervous. You have some of these big receivers in the last 5 to 10 years in the NFL where they don't translate very well. They put up the big numbers in college, and then they don't get open at the NFL level. One of the things with McMillan, though, is you watch him, and he's shockingly smooth and explosive, both getting open and then once he catches the ball out of that break, running with the ball. Is that me as a Wildcats homer trying to talk myself into this guy being like Drake London plus, or is McMillan actually going to be really good?
I think the safe money, honestly, at this point, you can critique any kind of player, but he does very much look like the wide receiver one in the class. I have Emeka Egbuka like right there with him. But team big wide receiver, if it's going to be revived, it's going to be by a player like it's going to be McMillan. And it's not just the physical, 6'5", 215 pounds and crazy efficient production, everything that we can see. Talking to his teammates, even last year when I got extensive time with Jacob Cowling at the Senior Bowl and then one-on-one interview with him, like I wouldn't even ask him about McMillan, and he would just talk about some of his favorite plays and how he learned from McMillan. And so I dug in a little bit more, and even as a true freshman, kind of how I talked about Dylan Sampson, he came in and was a leader of the team and was making the entire wide receiver room better because he was better than everybody else at age 18. And so coming in and just obviously being this difference making talent, it just stands out. And so I think a lot of people kind of forget because he's an Arizona wide receiver. They don't assume he's got all this pedigree because they're not known for bringing in the 5 stars. He was a top 50 or top 60 player depending on the recruiting service that you look at. So he was already expected to be this special talent even coming in to college. And so when you check all the boxes with 2.8 plus yards per route run, over 40% receiving yard market share last year, all the meaningful metrics we like to see, early breakouts and all that. And you go, man, he's just a physical specimen on top of all that. You go, oh yeah, yes, he could very well be a Drake London plus and be that top 10 NFL draft capital pick too.
I think Shawn's going to be pretty excited about that as we move here into draft season. A couple of names I think that could almost be paired together based on trying to see what the legitimate case for them is in the NFL and, how you're looking at what they did production-wise in college. Travis Hunter, is he good enough to play enough offense at the NFL level in terms of we're looking ahead to fantasy? Can he be somebody who's legitimately usable? The final season results for Luther Burden, how can we fully understand those? And then Trey Harris is the other one. How much of his production, Shawn has in the notes here, fake. I'm going to say legitimate to try and be nice about it. What's your thoughts on the way he developed or took time to develop at Ole Miss? Are those guys all in a similar bracket of there's a lot of questions around what we're going to see at the NFL level?
I think there might be some question. Definitely with Hunter, but I like Burden and Harris quite a bit. And I would put Egbuka again up in this group, kind of like with running backs. There's 5 guys that are kind of up there by themselves, honestly. And so Hunter, it's just, I don't think that he's going to be on offense enough. I really want it to happen because it would be amazing if he was out there playing 100 snaps a game at the NFL level, just doing something that even Deion Sanders, his coach, could not do at the NFL level, or at least they wouldn't let him do at the NFL level. And so I seriously doubt that happens. His instincts are too crazy good in coverage for a team to say, oh yeah, I don't want that on defense every snap, or I'm going to risk losing that on offense. And so I think they'll have packages for him and he'll have 15, 20 catches a year at his peak. But I don't think that we see some team actually make it fun because NFL hates fun. But sadly, that's just kind of how things go at times. And so if he does get full snaps, he's probably wide receiver 2 in the class, but he's not going to. And so that's a shame. But with the Burden, his quarterback, Brady Cook, without understanding the situation, you go like, what happened? Like he was at least like replacement level good. But Cook was dinged up and was hurt for Mizzou. And so with a hurt quarterback trying to find his wide receiver, just didn't go well. And the Missouri offense completely disappeared in their most important games outside of the easy schedule that they largely destroyed because everyone was bad. But they didn't even have to do a whole lot on offense against some of their really terrible schedules. So the production just wasn't there for Burden. He's still every bit the player that we saw break out really early and really impressively, especially as a sophomore. So yeah, he's at worst case, we're talking about he goes in the 20s in the real NFL draft. I'd say that's probably actually most likely at this point. And then Trey Harris, I don't think his production was fake. I think it was a little weird, given how he broke out and when he broke out. But when you come from like Louisiana Tech, you're not supposed to be anything. And again, so I'm going to go back to kind of like what I talked about on the running back show with you guys. Like when you're not supposed to be the guy and then you're the guy anyway, that says a lot about you as a player. And he was not supposed to be the guy. He was transferred up and still was. Like he was last year. I mean, I wouldn't have said that he would probably average over 5 yards per route run down the stretch had he stayed healthy, but he was like the most productive wide receiver in the country last year. And I wouldn't call it fake. In critical moments against top competition 2 years in a row, against SEC opponents, he was just dominant. After the catch, dominant. He can take a slant to the house, even though he doesn't have 4.4 wheels somehow. And so I'm really impressed by him. I want to see what his combine looks like, but I wouldn't say that his production is fake. I know people will talk about the Ole Miss scheme and Lane Kiffin and getting people wide open. And sometimes that's true, but I would say just practically speaking, oftentimes when they're wide open or he's in the right spot is because it involves a lot of pre-snap reads for the quarterback and the wide receiver and understanding like what kind of coverages he's looking at and knowing where to kind of stem his route to. And so that shows up a lot, even against the easier opponents. Like he's just in the right place at the right time because he's a really freaking smart player. So outside of the data that I think is not fake, he's just a really smart player who ascended when he shouldn't have.
That's really encouraging there. You'd love to hear that the guys who have made some of those jumps and have the numbers, that there's substance behind it. I love that. I love that.
I think it is. I think there is. And I wouldn't be surprised if he's a first round pick.
So you suggested the Elic Ayomanor here. He's one of these guys who his teammates, I mean, Marvin Harrison was not particularly good as a rookie, but in theory, and probably at some point as we go through here in practice, his teammates are so outlandishly good that he's not going to perform to that level on the same team with them, and yet could be one of these guys who gets on an NFL team and is better than all of those receivers. At least that's kind of how I'm thinking through where he is with his numbers there. And you seem to be very enthusiastic. You may be higher than that on him. Why should we like him even though he didn't really blow up at Ohio State?
So I like to go back to his 2022 because depending on how you kind of build any kind of predictive model of collective variables together, not just like one receiving yard market share or one receiving yards per team pass attempt or per route run or whatever you want to look at. If you weight them all together and you give them a score and look at all the players in the country, put it at like percentiles, like he was number 2 in the country among true sophomores as a sophomore. And the only player better than him was Marvin Harrison Jr., who was his teammate. And so it was like he was, even though he wasn't, the raw volume wasn't off the charts, his adjusted metrics when weighted together and compared to Marvin Harrison Jr., it's like he was the only one better than him in the entire country at the time. Now he had a lackluster season after that. And then this season being outproduced by a true freshman, you go, man, that's alarming, right? Well, Jeremiah Smith is, if he was in the NFL right now, he'd be a top 5 wide receiver in the NFL. So I'm not really concerned about being outproduced by a player who is truly generational and will most likely be the number 1 overall pick in the 2027 NFL draft. And I can say that with an absurd amount of confidence, unless there's like one quarterback in DJ Lagway who takes a step up and is eventually the guy. But I'm not really concerned about, hey, top 5 son of Hall of Famer legacy, wide receiver outproducing you. And then, maybe like a player who profiles better than Julio Jones, also being better than him on the same team. It's just it's kind of like a once in a lifetime comparable, because there's no one who's been in that situation ever. And so he just does a lot of things really well. And that 2022 season carries a lot of weight for me because it's the second year kind of like true breakout. And he did so long alongside Marvin Harrison Jr. And then he wasn't perfectly healthy at times in the year after that. And then was impressive enough, just didn't have to carry the load when you've got a generational talent on your team. So I still think he's very much a first round pick and deserving of it.
So it seems like this is where the pretty substantial tier break is. Is that the case? And then as we kind of move into the next guys, are there similarities between our Stanford guy here and Burden in terms of 2023 and then the collapse in 2024?
No, I would say it's more like he's a little bit more raw than Burden. I think I have concerns about, yes, I really enjoyed seeing him like dunk on even like Travis Hunter at one game where he went off for, I think it was like about 10,000 yards in the game, something like that. And it was just a ridiculous performance where he was just, mossing people. And people look back to that one Colorado game and you go, okay, that's why he's the player that we think he can be. But I have more questions, because is he just like a slant go sit route guy that is going to be kind of like limited on the outside and like one only, very specific role? And I think that might be the case with him. And yet, if he does win in that role, I think he's probably worth that day 2 capital. I just don't think practically in how he plays the game, he comps to any of the guys we've already talked about.
So then we have a trio of players that I want to make sure I'm not missing on simply because I don't like their production. Maybe there's backstory here, context, all of those things. When you look at the current mocks, when you read the sort of early results from what has already happened in prospect season, you tend to see people putting Matthew Golden, Xavier Restrepo, and then Isaiah Bond is almost in a separate little category where maybe I'm not hearing as much about him, but he does seem to be mocked into this area that makes no sense. Are these guys
keeping it nice?
Well, I'm rooting for all the players, but it seems like you should be drafted relative to your production and then like make a go of it from there.
Yeah.
What am I missing on these? But Restrepo had some good numbers, but they're good numbers as an older player that still aren't fantastic numbers. It doesn't seem like Golden or Restrepo are first round picks, but I am hearing them in that conversation. I'm open to being wrong on that. And we certainly have seen players in the last 3-4 years who did hit when maybe the resume wasn't fully there. Can these guys be that type of player?
So I think they're very different kind of players. And Restrepo, it's funny because like you think about all the really good Miami wide receivers in the history of the game, and Restrepo had more receiving yards than all of them. like Andre Johnson. I think who else like back in like prime days of Miami. And like no. Most receiving yards in Miami history is Xavier Restrepo. So that's cool. But part of that was because he stayed as long as he did. And so he projects as a slot receiver with enough size to succeed, I think, in that role. But he's not going to be a super hyper efficient or like wildly athletic guy. And so I think I agree with you. As much as I'm rooting for him to succeed, I just don't see the early round profile from him. I think in a class where we don't have a bunch of guys that really deserve to go round 2, people are like, well, somebody has to go round 2. And so he gets kind of thrust up in that conversation. I think he sticks around the league for a long time and just never offers a whole lot of ceiling, because a team's not going to ask him to do that, because he's not going to be the best wide receiver on his team at any point in his NFL career. Golden is a fun one because he had the pedigree as a recruit to go to a better school than Houston, but he chose to go to Houston anyway. And Houston's market share and their distribution there was a little odd in that they really like distributed targets to like 4 different players, 3 one of the years. But his second year, I guess, he was dinged up a little bit and missed a few games and had still managed like a half dozen touchdowns and was the best player. But he saw an opportunity to transfer where he probably should have gone in the first place and going to Texas. But he still wasn't actually really efficient necessarily there either, as you probably know also. And so, yes, he was probably the best wide receiver on the Texas team that went really far. And so he's going to get thrust up into conversations as people realize, oh, maybe he's actually the better Texas wide receiver of the two. But I don't see a first round wide receiver. I see a guy that really great day two profile. He should make some NFL team happy as their wide receiver 2 or 3, but not like a super high end difference maker. Isaiah Bond is just, we really wanted him to be something. He was in position to go off this year, and then he got dinged up. So we just don't know what he is. He's got crazy speed and can separate, has crazy like intermediate to deep success with the right quarterback. It's just, he really disappointed. And so I think he's probably going to be a day 2 pick at this point. And we're probably overthinking him. He's going to probably hit anyway, but his profile is a little alarming. So I'm not bullish in pursuing him, even though I've had him on teams for years now. So just skeptical.
We kind of were making the case for McMillan as team big wide receiver and bringing that back for us in 2025. There is some smaller guys in this class: Tez Johnson, Jalen Royals. You were talking already about being at the Senior Bowl. They put up some really poor tracking numbers at the Senior Bowl, but there was quite a bit of buzz at the end of it for Tez Johnson and how he did overall. Does that eliminate the upside outcomes for those two guys, or have you still some faith that there is something to see them at the NFL level?
Well, Tez was like, he was probably the best wide receiver there. But it's kind of a perfect environment practice-wise to just show off for these kind of guys who project to be slot wide receivers, because you're just like one-on-one against much bigger defensive backs who won't even be lining up against you in many cases at the next level. Like Azariah Thomas, who could go in the first round, intentionally chose to line up against Tez Johnson, knowing this is going to be the toughest matchup here in one-on-ones. And he lost because Tez Johnson can burn people from the slot. And I think that's where he thrives. And I think the Tank Dell projection is like his best case scenario. He doesn't have a super strong data profile, as you guys probably know, even though he had nice raw totals. So I wouldn't project like super high ceiling, but I think he's going to be great as a fun separator that sticks around for a while if he stays healthy. But Tank Dell is like the best case, and I think it might be worse. Yeah, I'd love to like him more.
And Tank Dell was the best case for Tank Dell.
Yeah, Tank Dell's outcome was like the best case. Yeah, exactly.
Now there's somebody to compare these guys to, but before Tank Dell, there wasn't a huge amount of names to compare to.
Nobody. Like recently, we see like even like Tutu Atwell, and he was kind of a weird one. Just anyway, like he had a lot of. I liked him because he had the crazy efficiency. But one thing I learned later and didn't know at the time was he just wasn't somebody who got the X's and O's like at all. And so like that's like there's certain off-field things that we can't know. I think Tez gets it. And so I think that's why he sticks longer. But again, I'm not projecting super high ceiling.
Anything on Royals?
Royals, I don't get the hype at all. So I just no, that's the long and short of it. Like I don't think he separates really well. I don't think he's super technical. I don't like the peak production profile. I don't like the competition questions. And like when he got open at the Senior Bowl, even like he was like shoving people, and like I was just like, okay. So I might be wrong on him, but I feel like everything to me says no with him.
That feels like you're out on him then.
Quite a bit. If you couldn't tell.
So Travis, last year at this time, you mentioned Jalen McMillan that completely relieved any of the nerves that I had about recommending someone, again, based on the trajectory that he had sort of through his Washington career versus the other bigger names at that time on his own team. We recommended him to everyone. Obviously, you had to be patient, but then he has that massive final third of the season. This is kind of the sleeper time, or the explain the profiles for these guys, picking out the later stars again in this thinner class. Before we get too much into that, maybe take me through Williams here and the massive amount of rushing that he had. And if there's going to be, would we have a true hybrid type of player who can score wide receiver fantasy points almost as a running back, or is this a niche type of thing that, you really can't do at the NFL, and we shouldn't really worry about his profile very much?
Yeah, Savion Williams is somebody that the NFL likes a lot because, like, he's he's whatever people wanted Cordero Patterson to be when he came out, based on like how he was used at TCU at times. But I don't think any NFL team's actually going to take advantage of that. Like, he's a big body dude that can make people miss more than he should, and he can moss people when he is asked to here and there. But it's a really weird profile to project in the early rounds to me. I know that a lot of people. One of my buddies is like, "Why is he 5?" I'm like, "No," but but I mean, he's going to be one of those guys that I think finds value for real football purposes to stick around. I just don't think that for fantasy it's going to be super useful.
So we've got, I think, interesting names in Felton, Horton, Noel, Hudson, White, Nash, Chisholm, Brooks. I mean, those guys kind of run a fairly large spectrum in terms of where they're expected to be drafted. But these are the names that I picked out as seeing interesting production pieces where maybe the perception still isn't that high. There are some other names as well that I don't necessarily see the production, but I might be missing important parts of the backstory. Who do we need to be focusing on at wide receiver as we kind of get into this, pick 75 to pick 150, and then even if there are deep sleepers?
2 categories, I think. One is the hyper athletic wide receiver who's going to see their stock raise a little bit here soon. And the other is like a production story that I think needs to be told. The first group is Ty Felton, Jalen Noel, and Kyle Williams. Ty Felton of Maryland, Jalen Noel of Iowa State, and then Kyle Williams of Washington State. Those were 3 really hyper athletic guys at the Senior Bowl, and I think they're all going to test really well with some vertical speed and or agility. Ty Felton, I talked to his agent, and then one of the guys who does a bunch of the like highlight film work that they do to get people interested. And they were just talking about how unreal his athleticism is, like, against anybody else that they're like training with. They've got like 25 athletes to do a bunch of cross training. Felton is otherworldly, and that checked out. He was I built a player tracking model based off the Senior Bowl's data, and Felton was like the most athletic wide receiver since 2018 of any wide receiver at the Senior Bowl based on the on-field athleticism data. So Felton's probably gonna get he's probably gonna go round 3 because the team's gonna have the actual player tracking data from college and go, yes, please. And then Jalen Noel and Kyle Williams had ascendant production and nice top speed and agility. So I think they might go higher than a lot of people think, in that top 125-ish range. And so I'd take a shot at those guys later on, but I don't necessarily believe in the production profiles of all those actually being super real outside of like overly reliant on some athletic characteristics. But the other 2 stories I like to highlight, Ricky White of UNLV, because the competition questions playing in the Mountain West, right? But he was before that actually had a breakout moment even at Michigan State. So he chose to, I don't know all the reasons why he chose to transfer, but he chose to transfer down from Michigan State to UNLV, and then just was clearly playing. I mean, it's just not even these little poor kids, man. Like, they're just not even the same level of athlete. And so Ricky White just embarrassed people and was one of the most efficient wide receivers in the country. So he looked way faster, man amongst boys, and really just even on underneath stuff, making it way too easy for himself at times. And so I really like Ricky White, regardless of the capital he gets, even though it's probably capping it, round 4, maybe round 5. And similarly, for some reason, some people don't think that Ja'Cory Brooks, former 5-star wide receiver, by the way, is worth a look in the earlier rounds. Ja'Cory Brooks, former Alabama wide receiver, transfers to Louisville this past year and goes off, by the way, for them. Was like the best thing they had going on offense, and was over 1,000+ yard player. And every single week, I feel like he was making some absurd play that shouldn't happen. Like his ball tracking, like he'd be like, okay, the ball is supposed to be on my outside right shoulder, right? Tyler Shuck is not good, even though people are hyping him up. And so, like, oh, the ball's not even close. So I'm going to spin around and make a catch that should not be possible at the last second. And it's like, okay, there's the ball tracking. There's the skills that we saw that made him literally a 5-star wide receiver recruit coming in that went to Alabama and was supposed to be the best wide receiver in a really impressive class for them. He kind of got in Nick Saban's doghouse in 2023, and that's not a good place to be because Saban will just put you on the bench. I don't know what happened there. And I think there's some questions with how and why that happened. And so that might be why people are pressing him down. But his final season screams day 2 capital to me. And so if teams don't take an opportunity on him in round 3, that's a huge mistake because he's got 5-star level upside and he proved it this final year. And in 2022, he was actually the wide receiver 1 for Bryce Young. Like he was emerging as that go-to guy, especially down the stretch towards the end of the year. So there's a story to be told with Ja'Cory Brooks. And if you're not, if you don't have him in your top 120-ish prospects, might be doing it wrong.
I like that note there. That feels, I mean, obviously the Jalen McMillan one was just a massive hit, but that feels like a potential McMillan pick for this year. Yeah. It was one where when I kind of went back and looked at it, because of playing Devi, I knew that he had that recruit pedigree. And then when I saw his final season, I was like, this doesn't make sense to me, right? I mean, this was someone who came into college with a ton of hype and then had a good final season. Where is the hype now?
Yeah, I don't know. Like I'm looking around like, guys, am I crazy? Like, I don't know what's going on because I feel like I'm the only person I don't see. And like when you look at the mock data, like our A to Z sports mock draft data, we're a little higher than consensus. Like like he's around pick 90 or something like that. But consensus stuff out there right now with like the mom and pop blogs who have no idea what's going on. He's like a round 5 kind of player, and that's just wrong to me.
Well, we will wrap up the receivers there. That was awesome. I can't wait for quarterbacks and tight ends. Some other names also interesting, but we'll have to bide our time with the
Shawn's
rest of them.
Sticking all his willpower here today.
It's just I'm gonna keep my mouth shut on the rest of the game.
So we'll jump into QBs. Give me 1 second here.